So I'll take the opportunity as we wait to sort out the clicker to introduce Patrick Donegan. You know, the MEF has a long history of working with the analyst community. Obviously, they're important partners with us to educate, to understand what we're doing, understand the impact. We learn a lot from them. Patrick's no stranger to this industry. I think we've engaged with MEF probably almost from the beginning, or maybe for 15 years or something like that. He's the founder and principal analyst now with Happenstance, and he's going to lead our panel. And I think we'll let the panel introduce themselves, or whether you want to take that on, or it's up to you, Pascal.
Yeah. Craig, why don't you go first?
There you go.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Craig Connors. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for the SASE business at VMware.
Hi, everyone. I'm Frank Morales from Orange Business Services. Would like to welcome you again in Paris, and I'm in charge of services within connectivity plus security for Orange Business Services.
Hi, I'm Jael Valente. I run enterprise routing and SD-WAN Viptela, because we have two different SD-WAN solutions. One is Meraki, one is Viptela, based on the acquisition we made 4 years ago, almost 5, at Cisco Systems.
I think everyone know me. I just yap for 30 minutes. So.
Can I get the next one, please, now? All right, there we go. Okay, so what we have here, and this slide is going to stay up with us for the duration, is the highlight of some research that Stan Hubbard, a former colleague of mine at Heavy Reading back in the good old days, Stan Hubbard has done on behalf of MEF and MEF members. This is the summary slide, and actually we thought what would be a good way to approach this session would be to kind of speak to each of those 4 columns. So there's, I believe, many, if not all of you, should already have received or have had access to this research. So many of you will be familiar with it already. So the idea is we're going to speak to these 4 columns, these pillars, if you will. And I'm going to ask in the very first instance, Frank, by popular request of all of our panelists here, we'd like for you to kind of give a few minutes of a sweeping overview across the 4 pillars. You know, what Orange is seeing in the marketplace, and what you see as the place for, you know, the 3 technologies as listed here.
Okay, thank you. So I would try to make it simple for everyone and crisp and sharp, as you asked me, Patrick, when we prepared. So for once, I would go in the right way from left to right. Yes, SD-WAN is quite an important success in terms of revenue. We are globally within Orange Business Services growing in that matter. It really depends on the market. I mean, for international, growth is just amazing. In France, for local market, as Anne-Marie presented this morning, from SO to SO is not yet affected by SD-WAN, but from SMB, let's say, to a large account it's growing as well. And we are very happy with that. Especially for international market, UCS, I mean, underlay communication services is very one where we are looking at, because of course we are translating, as Anne-Marie said this morning, from MPLS to internet, all our customer base. So it's very important, but in the same time, we have been able to get into new logos. What is very important with that is the tremendous amount of new business that we are able to make with customers. So, I mean, cloud connectivity, connectivity to and in the cloud, of course, security, which brings us to the next topic of SASE. We've done a lot. And for SASE, let's say it's a bit of mixed feeling, because it depends what we're talking about. So right from the beginning, within Orange Business Services, we said there is no possibility to have a SD-WAN project without security. And we were referring this morning about Siemens, and Siemens has been a 5 years deployment on underlay, of course, on SD-WAN. But in the meantime, we have moved everything in terms of security. Security at edge, with next-gen firewalling and so on, but also security in the cloud using one of our main partners, which is Zscaler, no secret there. And so what does that mean? Did we make SASE already with Siemens or not? It's a big question we have currently. And we know it's not exactly that, but somehow we are doing a lot of security with our WAN services today, and we will, of course, continue to go and to increase that. We spoke this morning with what we are doing currently, but I will come back to that. Next chapter is SD-WAN, some challenges for service provider. What's up finally? We have moved SD-WAN from solution-oriented, but we were pushing to customer projects. So it's really something that as a service provider, we have to manage. Of course, we still have a lot to do in terms of defining, formalizing use cases. So far what we did and managing several vendors in managed services is we have done a lot of things to abstract the complexity. So we have done an API layer abstraction in order to say we have done a portal abstraction. So we have the same portal for our vendors solution. So we want that the portals ask an API, and the API, depending on the vendor behind, is working in the same way because we have done this API abstraction layer to make that happen. It's where we really need to push all this in use cases definition, API toward these use cases, to push that with my dear colleagues there from the tab. I'm very happy to have GL and Craig to explain that we need that in order to simplify all this for us, of course, but mainly for our customers because life is quite complicated today for our customers. Of course, integration of security comes, let's say, with the last topic of SASE for provider and the challenges. When we look after all these challenges, the first point is we are not there yet. We are not there yet. It's if we could take a step back and say, does that really make sense? Does SASE tangible today in terms of market? And we know that I explained that last week. I was with Daniele in a conference, and I explained that I have for me SASE will be dead in 2 years.
Will be late in 2 years or late?
Dead.
Dead. Oh, right.
Dead
Not
in
led,
2
dead.
years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Very excited statement. It's an important bargain I have with my strategic director. But when you think about that, SD-WAN was clear. It was a bug somehow. It was tangible. It was a service. You have a box SD-WAN. You are delivering a service. It's something. SASE is a concept. Gartner defined it. But then we have a lot to do in defining it, in making the use cases, in making all that happen. And it's where I think we have still a lot to do. I mean, but SASE is delivering in terms of concept to answer customer expectation in terms of IoT deployment, hybrid working, moving application to the cloud. This is absolutely true. They need it. But then we need to make it more clear for our customers to make this, of course, as a very clear use cases and to be able to mix all solutions. And it's where we need to move forward, I think.
Very, very simple question, Frank. You can't let me leave you without asking you to follow up. SASE will be dead in 2 years. Why?
I mean, SASE today, the term SASE is to industry focus, technological. You don't know what is behind finally. So I think we'll deliver SASE in 2 years, but maybe with a new name, something like that.
Okay, well, so Craig, let me ask you to come back on that one first. I mean, you run VMware's SASE business, so what are you going to be doing in 2 years?
Well, Nan was talking about how when you have enough money, you can work anywhere, and I'm on the beach.
Well, there you go, right. Okay, there you go.
No, but I think Frank does have a point. Obviously, I disagree with him about it being dead in 2 years. But I think the term SASE, if you look at what it originally described when it was coined, and you look at what the term has been sort of co-opted to be a description of how we deliver on this remote work and distributed workforce. And that's not really what we set out to achieve when we set out to build SASE. And so I think from that perspective, I agree with Frank that what we talk about and what we envision today as SASE will be a lot different 2 years from now.
Right. So it's a matter of nomenclature. It's a matter of the generic direction is kind of agreed, but whether we call it that or not is something different. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, somehow, yes. Yes,
Okay.
yes. I do agree with the definition.
All right, Joe, where are you on this sort of overview that Frank shared with us to start with?
I will I'll go to the beach with Craig. No, yeah, I think terms are terms. Right now, so if you look at SD-WAN and SASE, of course, in SASE, the network services, including SD-WAN, is part of it, part of the use cases. But SD-WAN, if you look at those different technologies and horizon, SD-WAN is happening now. It's been happening. It's really it's a sustaining innovation at this point, versus actually SASE, the other elements to it, is more a disruptive innovation. And that's where, when it's disruptive, then there's confusion, there are terms, there's hype, there are many players coming in from different fields trying actually to reposition themselves into something that maybe is more palatable to them. So I think there is definitely a lot there. And back to what is already discussed to MEF, I think while SD-WAN is really sustained, and therefore, those APIs are important. They are definitely important. Some of those service definition, et cetera, is even more important for the disruptive innovations, because it's chaos right now. It's everybody goes its own ways. We invent our own APIs, our own metrics, our own terminology, and makes it very confusing for customers. They don't even know exactly. Everyone is asking to tell me exactly what you mean by SASE. It's where it starts. You can have debates for hours on it.
Right. So Pascal, Frank used this term, been dead in a couple of years. From a MEF point of view, does that rattle you, or is that kind of water for ducks back? It's just a nomenclature matter for you.
I think really what's happening is the market's maturing, and really they're trying to understand what is, as the panelist has said, basically SASE being this white paper that's by Gartner, and that's the official de facto standard in the market.
It's tone from above.
Yeah, and basically that's the official de facto standard everybody's going by, and really it doesn't define very much. You really can't understand what you're getting from it. And SD-WAN has really been coming from the same problem, the idea of that, there's really no definition. So I don't know, cybersecurity, cloud cybersecurity is definitely in. And cybersecurity is going to be sprinkled throughout, from the endpoints, even the CPE is going to have some cybersecurity of a firewall, a SLEACE. There will be a cloud scrubbing section for sure, which will have all kinds of, DLPs and blah, blah, CASBs and all the things that, swags and all the things that Gartner talked about. But there'll also be, at the hyperscalers and clouds, there'll be, if you have a web server, you're going to have a web application firewall or a web application API firewall now. WAP, and so there's a sprinkling of functions that have to be managed and understood, and obviously XDR, managed XDR is also part of that. So that to me is what we're trying to get to. If you're calling that SASE, I don't know, that's just a name that Gartner came up with, but to me, that's kind of what we're trying to get to as an industry.
But it just does speak a little bit, doesn't it, to the different heritages of the telecom sector and the cybersecurity sector in the way that what on earth standard would mean. I mean, Gartner just get to sort of write a WAP, throw a bomb in the room and walk away. There's no technical specifications to back it up, right? So, which meets the networking world, which is all about detailed, multilateral, over and over agreed, hardened standards. There's a kind of incompatibility between those two heritages at this point of time, right?
Well, but that's what we've done. In SD-WAN, we've actually defined the language, as JL's talked about. At least get to common language. I mean,
we've done that in the networking context.
Yeah, okay, but we'll talk about that in SASE in a second. But what we've done in MEF is when we said, okay, well, there's confusion. Let's go define SD-WAN. That was like 4 years ago, okay? and SD-WANs really came out 2011, 2012, 2013. So 4 years ago, well down the path, we came up with a standard, the first start of it, and now we're in version 2 of 70.1, we call it, in version 2. It's a service definition, just like we do with Carrier Ethernet. It's well described, not only the vocabulary language, we can all talk the same thing, which is really important, but it also defines the performance objectives. How do you measure performance? Are you measuring over 1 minute for packet loss, jitter, delays, or are you measuring over a second? Because that'll have a huge impact when I say what's packet loss, jitter, or delays. So that's all well described, and it doesn't matter how you implement it. We're actually now doing the same thing for SASE.
Right.
Okay, we're defining what is SASE, what's the language, what's the framework, and we're also applying, because with SASE, you're going to have zero trust. You're going to have the ability of authentication and authorization. And ZTNA is where, Gartner came up with their definition of ZTNA, which is the zero trust framework. And so again, we have another sister companion that's doing zero trust. And the only zero trust that's ever come out of any definition has come out from the Cloud Security Alliance on software-defined perimeters.
Was Zero Trust Gartner or was that Forrester?
Well, Forrester.
Sorry, right.
Yeah.
Just thought.
Yeah, it's just, exactly. But the thing is that it was more of a white paper. NIST came out with a white paper of zero trust, which is a nice little framework, but but just a white paper. And basically, the Cloud Security Alliance came out with a software-defined perimeter, which defines ZTNA. And again, it was like a white paper. You go look at our work, it's by far not a white paper. It's very detailed. And one thing I can tell you is MEF's standardization is known for the quality. And if you look at any work, 70.1, you look at the 117 is SASE, and I think 118 is Zero Trust. And we have much more work. It's really, really detailed. And our members have done a tremendous job. And now the industry needs to take it, adopt it, and get to commonality so everybody gets in the same boat, understanding what they're buying. And yet have differentiation. That's important. And we always do that with respect. We respect differentiation.
Sure. Okay, what we're going to do now is move through each of these pillars. We're going to speak to each of them in turn. JL, I'm going to invite you to take the first one on SD-WAN and revenue growth expectations. Tell us a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of your customer base. Stan's research here shows us that the overwhelming majority of SD-WAN service providers are expecting 30% revenue growth of SD-WAN in 22. How does that, is that a representative average from your point of view? What sort of numbers are you seeing from your customers?
So the reason why we are here, and the reason why, for example, Cisco is here as well, is we believe that given the level of the rapid innovation, the number of technologies and the disruption and the complexity and the lack of skills, managed service providers have massive role to play. That market will be 60, 70, 80% service provider-led or managed service provider-led. Now, the way here as well is to the point that was made in terms of disruption is you have new players entering the market who said, I can actually offer managed security services and combine that with maybe other alliance with traditional service providers that do more the networking side. But there is an opportunity for the networking service providers or telecommunication operators, communication service providers to really offer everything as well, either through alliances, but also in their own environment. So I think for us, it's very critical then that if we look at the route to market being actually a managed service, not just they do it yourself first, there are enterprises that do it, but most of the market will be managed services. In that context, then how actually those managed service providers, what is the level of definition that enable actually to compare the different vendors, transact, supply chain aspect, very critical in that digital type of service. And so all of those elements are very important. This market is huge. We're talking maybe $20 billion in 2 or 3 years. If you combine obviously all of the aggregation of services, whether it's SD-WAN, whether it's Zero Trust, whether it's DLP, whether it's CASB, whether it's SWIG, et cetera, cloud firewall. So I think it's not just all in the clouds, but it's delivered also as a service. There's also the opportunity for organizations like ours, different from VMware. Cisco is coming from a hardware company that has moved to hardware and software, moved to recurring software, because we are talking here about really more of an OpEx play And now where we are working on is that OpEx plays not just for the software, but also for the hardware. Hardware as a subscription or hardware as a service, and you're going to see that coming in. So that creates actually a massive opportunity as we are churning all of those appliances and so on.
Craig, do those numbers tally with you when you look across your customer base? Are they representative of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, and I think in some regions, it's much more than 30%, right? I think SD-WAN penetration has been very inconsistent globally. And so there are markets like Latin America where SD-WAN success is much lower than it is in North America, Western Europe, those parts of the world. So I think definitely SD-WAN continues to grow in importance. While SASE is emerging as a more nascent market, SD-WAN as the established way of delivering enterprise networking continues to grow. And I know Gartner dictates from on high, as you said, but they've renamed the WAN Edge Magic Quadrant this year to the SD Magic Quadrant. And that really underscores that this is the way that you connect the WAN Edge today.
Mm-hmm. Frank, any thoughts on that column there?
On the SD-WAN?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
I think one of the challenge of the SD-WAN is up to which extent it will go deeper in terms of market sizing. It's really, now MNCs is fine and it's booming. Large national account as well. I think when you go down to SMBs or a layer just under, it needs to be explained, maybe a bit like SASE is today. It needs to be simplified as well. And we have and what it is so important to move forward on use cases and all these kind of things, because we also have, and I do agree with GL about the role of service provider. The reason why we are there as well. But in addition to that, we are seeing the range of the responsibility in terms of managed services to be very important. So customer wants to do more and more, or some of us not too much, but we need to be able to provide them with this capability to manage from just a steering policy or to do more in the management system. And it's where the role of the management service is also moving forward into that direction. And the deeper you are in the market, the lower you are in the market, you can see people who are willing to say, I want to be very reactive and to be able to manage this and this and this in my solution. But you remain accountable for the SLA, of course, while I'm doing some elements on the management system. It's somewhere the current challenge that you want.
Can I maybe ask you a bit more about the managed services? Because if you look at the managed security space that year, those companies that played across the board tended to find profitability quite difficult. In more recent years, you've had kind of focused players that are focused on the detection and response piece, the MDR, that newer entrants, and they kind of cherry-picked a little bit. And they're doing the kind of the higher margin stuff, and they appear to be doing more successfully. How do you, when you integrate the networking stuff and the security, how do you approach the challenge of maintaining profitability with managed security? Because that hasn't always been that easy. C'est pas évident in French.
I think so far what we have been able to do is, especially working on all these projects on large account years, really to push forward the level of observability, capability to monitor, to report, to detect at the higher level, at the highest level, in order to provide a large value for customers, because it's somehow, and I think it will be the same in the next few months or years for SD-WAN, the observability, the monitoring, the way you are able to or detect in advance for security or make sure that the user experience is good for SD-WAN is probably where the value is for customers. So you need to add this. I think SD-WAN is not delivering a connection plus a box. is much more than that in terms of managed services. And it is the same for security. And the more you are able to provide in observability, monitoring, reporting, detection, all these kind of things is really where the value is. Because at the end of the day, when you think about, you put your shoes on the CIO, they are not managing at all more infrastructure. They are managing infrastructure. It's cloud-based. They are not managing too much of network and security. It's moving to virtualization, to cloud-based and so on. So what is their nightmare every day is to move their application to the cloud, and suddenly their help desk, the ratio of calls is booming to 20, 50, 100%. And so their users are dissatisfied. So they need to see all this in a very clear manner in order to make sure that even though they don't have hands on the infrastructure, they have the ability to monitor the performance and the security as well.
Pascal, I loved what you said in your talk when you talked about XDR, because XDR is a huge market space. A lot of it is going terrifically well, but in terms of the kind of R part, in terms of being, CISOs being willing to automate the R part today, it's very, very limited. People don't dare to automate the response part because the interoperability isn't there. So that's a place where you guys can play, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the bottom line is getting expertise in anything today is really hard. And certainly in cybersecurity, someone who can understand what is a real threat and not. And so we're using AI ops to do that, and all kinds of AI MLs to say, hey, yours a detection, and so how do I respond to that? So now we're getting AIs telling us, okay, well, this is, look here, check your, test this, to see if it's real, because you can get, a lot of false positives. So, the amount of noise even coming out from these kind of alerts as saying there's a potential of attack is large, and to understand what's noise and what's signal is really complex. These researchers, I mean, they're the ones that really understand this stuff, but you can't have researchers handling your SOCs. So it's really hard to get any skilled person to come in. So you're going to try to rely on machines, but you still have to have some person understand what is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Craig, let's go to the next one. So the second column, the SD-WAN provider challenges. That order of 1, 2, 3, 4 makes sense to you? Do you see greater emphasis on one rather than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously number one, especially for this audience, is a big challenge. I've been in the SD-WAN space, well, before we called it SD-WAN, so for 15 years. We used to call it WAN virtualization back then. And at some point, there were 65 or 70 vendors claiming to be SD-WAN vendors. And now we've consolidated down to where really there are 6 of us that have the vast majority of the market, more than 90% of the market. But that consolidation was really driven by consumers choosing the vendors that they wanted to work with. Pascal talked about the standardization that MEF has tried to drive, and unfortunately, that hasn't really been reflected in our vendor community, right? And so the 6 of us that are leading the market, we're still 6 very different solutions, with different ways of measuring packet loss, with different ways of reacting to link steering events, with different API sets, right? And Frank talked about Orange, and this is a very common thing where providers end up building these abstraction layers to unify a view to their customers to say, this is what SD-WAN is, and hide that vendor specificity under the covers. And so I think it's a big challenge for vendors. Probably the biggest challenge for vendors is just normalizing, even if there's only 6, normalizing amongst those 6 and getting those vendors to align on a standard definition of what things look like and a standard API definition, and try to make it easier for service providers to manage those different offerings. And there's a vendor benefit to that too, because the more similar we make our offerings, the easier it is for customers to have mobility between solutions, right? I was talking at the dinner we had last night about, VMware SD-WAN. We have never churned a customer more than 500 sites. And you could say that's a good thing. We've also never had a competitor's customer that large come to VMware, and that's because it's very difficult to move a large customer over, just because you get locked into this API specificity and those other things. I think quickly touching on the other three options, I don't want to touch on security too much because the next topic is really going to cover that in detail, but I think an interesting part in SD-WAN is ZTNA. And there's a question that's burgeoning right now about whether ZTNA is part of SASE or whether it's part of SD-WAN.
Mm-hmm.
Because over the last 2 years, SD-WAN has changed a lot because it's not just about connecting the branch office anymore. Users have this mobility of working in the office, out of the office, part-time, sometimes in the office, sometimes out of the office, and it's become a real challenge even from a network connectivity side to maintain a consistent connectivity model for those users. And so ZTNA, VPN, those security pieces are really becoming part of the SD-WAN buying decision. End-to-end SLA is obviously a challenge for service providers. One of the benefits of SD-WAN is the agility that comes with delivering features and software and things like that. But I heard a rumor that software sometimes has bugs. Certainly not ours. No. We got really used to ASICs and FPGAs and being able to really deliver end-to-end SLAs to customers that we could put our reputation behind. And it becomes a lot more challenging when you have not just software in the mix, but multiple vendor software in the mix. And you have to consider, the risk that you undertake of committing an SLA to the customer when it could be a software vendor issue that takes down the network. It's a little less predictable than it used to be in the old days. That's a big challenge. And then last, customer education. Even though SD-WAN is becoming ubiquitous, customer education is still a challenge. I still hear people say, my WAN links are high quality, so why do I need SD-WAN? As if network optimization is the only reason that SD-WAN is being deployed in the market. And I think some of the other benefits around automation and things like that are lost along the way. And maybe, again, that's the place where standardized APIs and those things will help. So a lot of just, even though SD-WAN is becoming mainstream in driving adoption to the next level.
Frank, you wanted to talk about, I think you wanted to talk about integration of security options here, maybe, but before that, let me just ask you to follow up on the point that Craig made. Assuming that you take your vendors at face value, which I assume you do, and they want to agree to support the normalization of the presentation of the status of the SD-WAN network in the way that Craig outlined, what then, if we arrive at the point of normalization through MEF, what then remain the kind of key differentiators from your perspective as a buyer? If they've normalized at that level?
A customer or
Indeed,
as a service provider?
As a buyer of their products.
Buyer of the products. I think from a service provider standpoint, you have got to make around the technology. So it's again, SD-WAN project. I think at the beginning, as it has been perceived somehow as a network optimization, cost optimization, all these kind of things. Today is really the foundation of the network, of the digital transformation, let's say, of the move to cloud. So here's all what you are able to put around in terms of services to make sure that the digital transformation will be somehow, and it's where we are moving. We'll explain that later, but somehow the infrastructure today and the network, of course, is one of the main elements of the infrastructure, is providing the capability for customers to make their business grow, to innovate, because all the business for companies is now relying on technology somehow. And the fact that the infrastructure, with that, the infrastructure is becoming somehow a business platform, and it integrates the WAN, of course, the cloud connectivity, the security in there. So it's all this infrastructure global that you are able to provide or to manage. Because at one point in time, all customers don't want to put all their elements in the same basket of Orange or whoever it is. So it's when you are able to facilitate the creation of this business platform, that you are providing value to customers. And it's where you can differentiate yourself in front of buyers.
That's right. JL, did you want to speak to the second column there?
I think Craig touched on a number of key points. And I think when you talk about actually SASE and SD-WAN, though, again, and you mentioned earlier the taxonomy of the customers. I think we, and obviously OBS, the large service providers have gone after the cream of the crop, the largest organizations like Siemens, mentioned about Sony or others, big companies that actually, global, and those really are projects more than products.
Mm-hmm.
You put large teams around, full focus. But back to the mid-market, like we'll talk about SASE, the mid-market doesn't have the knowledge, the skills, still have the same requirements, as Anne-Marie mentioned, of performance, of agility, and of security. They don't have a SOC. They will never be. Yeah. That's where obviously the service providers can come in and offer 24 hours support, because even though you're a mid-market or a small organization, you're more and more international. You have offices in other parts of the world, maybe in Europe, maybe in Asia, in a few countries. You may be only 25 people, but you are scattered. So how actually do you cover that? So I think, and those organizations being smaller also don't have the challenges of network ops, tech ops. That's one team, very few people usually, and they're going to rely upon the service providers. When there are big field organizations, although the reason why SASE makes a lot of sense, we forget the name, going ways, but at the end of the day, net services, segmentations, identity by to zero trust has to go with the rest of the security stack. Those things have to come together. Security policies have to be attached to network policies. So how do you do that in a proper way, yet with organizations that will continue to have SecOps, because it's a different business, NetOps, but yet they need to collaborate better. And so you need to render that also in the capabilities, in the tools. And so I think that's part of the challenges organizationally as well. Those organizations need to evolve in terms of how do they come together, because today the RFPs are a bit of a hodgepodge on the SASE side. And then also is who's driving? Is it the SD-WAN folks? If it's greenfield, SD-WAN or security? Well, more often than not, it's the security team. Why? Because the level of risk is perceived as much higher on the security side than it is on the networking. So I think all of those elements play into, that transformation of the market. It's not just the technology, it's also organizational, logistical, and then really key role that the service providers have.
I think everything you've just said there, Pascal, is kind of the rationale for where MEF is going, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, look, Frank, JL, and Craig said brilliantly. There's nothing more I can add. I think personally, the idea that the market everybody's gone after the top side of the market, as JL's talked about. There's a massive market. And as Anne-Marie said, the internet is the new WAN, and it should look like and behave like MPLS. And I think she said that. And SD-WAN's the way to deliver that. That means that the whole market for wide area network has become the internet carrying, and who cares about the transport? The overlay becomes the intelligent policy paradigm that decides how to classify applications, including many encrypted applications, and how to make sure it's steering correctly, meet its objectives, and not someone says packet loss delays over 1 minute versus one said over 1 second. It's very clearly defined. We're trying to do that. We're trying to make sure it's a black box, a service definition, and everybody understands that it behaves that way. And you put something in and you put some, defects into it, it will still behave on the outcome of what it said it was supposed to do. And that's really, so the whole market of wide area network becomes SD-WAN, right? So everybody wins, the 6 or 7 vendors. The market is not just 7 billion or whatever it says, or 25 or 30%. It goes to like 100% over the next decade. And every SMB doesn't even think about it. It's a really smart internet, or that's the way I see it.
Right. Okay. Frank, this the third column in your opening remarks. You made a controversial remark about with respect to SASE or the term.
Did I say that SASE will be dead in 2 years already? Yeah, I said.
So let's do what the Americans call double clicking into that a little bit. Take us a little bit into more detail.
Yeah. I think what we are seeing since the beginning is making me thinking about what really we have in mind. So if you think about it, from beginning of 2010, 12, something like that, up to 2020 somehow, companies has moved progressively, I would say slowly, a bit depending on the geography, their workload to the cloud. Mm-hmm. It has been very slow at the beginning, some SaaS, a bit of IaaS, but it was quite slow at the end of the day. And what we have made in terms of connectivity, infrastructure, security is finally to adapt what we had. We had MPLS and VPN and security on site, and we security guys do the next-gen firewall, and connectivity service provider their cloud connectivity, connecting their backbone to cloud service providers. When we put a bit of internet to do hybrid network, when we did SD-WAN, but still SD-WAN has been launched at the beginning as an evolution of the MPLS, an evolution of VPN, of course, a bit more internet, a bit more application-centric, whatever it is. But we were still in an adaptation of what was in place. And when looking forward, you think that 2030, I think 100% of workload will be cloud-based. Mm-hmm. People will work remotely in an hybrid world. The way IoT sensor will be strongly displayed across the globe, machine connected, car connected, everything will be there. So if we continue to adapt things, it will not work. It makes no sense to continue to adapt. We need to think forward and have something completely different. It's the reason why we have with the telco cloud platform that Maurice presented this morning. It's one way to answer, but we need much more than that. We need to think about federating resources in terms of local loop with internet provider, federating resources in terms of backbones, federating resources with hyperscalers, federating resources with editors. And what we just announced with Fortinet, and I'm sure we will announce with us in the next couple of months, it's really to say, finally, for a service provider, pace of technology is so strong that we can't maintain our leadership in that. Let's rely on the guys who are doing the innovation on the service. And at the end of the day, what is our main value as a service provider is to make sure that we can do end-to-end, that we can orchestrate services between them, making sure that the SASE service inside our infrastructure work with any SD-WAN solution, any internet solution, any MPLS solution, with any cloud connectivity, and that there is a consistency in securing the edge or the equipment or the end users, having this somehow security in the telco cloud and having the security in the cloud. So it's all this that we need to think differently, and it's where we didn't speak too much about the first one, but it's where all the work that are currently ongoing at MEF are so important, because it's a way to build this picking forward solution for 2030.
All right, we've got about 3 minutes left. So what I'm going to ask Craig and then Jill to run in a minute or so, it would to what Frank said there, please.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the reasons I joined the tab is because I think standardization is critical in SASE. One of the reasons why it's critical, especially for providers, is if we look at SD-WAN, I'm a bit of a historian because I've been here the whole time. 2007, Talari was the first one to say, let's build an overlay and abstract across multiple links. 2009, Meraki said, let's bring a cloud management component to our routers. 2012, 2013, we had Versa, Viptela, CloudGenix, and VeloCloud all start, bring those two concepts together. 2015, we started launching with tier 2s. 2016, we started launching with tier 1s with Viptela and Verizon and VeloCloud with AT&T. So now that's 9 years from the inception of an idea. Tier 1 goes bringing it to their customers. You look at SASE, and someone came up with an idea and was like, go sell it. And we're still trying to figure out what is SASE, what is the definition, what are the components. Everyone says they have SASE, and then Gartner says, no, it's not SASE, so this is SSE, here's a new term, so that Zscaler stops calling themselves SASE, and very confusing a place to be in, right? So I think why standardization is so important is because it's not normal for large service providers to be in this chaos innovation phase and to sell it at the same time. Usually we step in a much more mature market, and that's where standardization will really help.
But I've got to say that is the beautiful thing about, the way standards are done in MEF and other telecom SDAs. No one vendor can rock up at the standards body and go, hey, can you take things all the way over here for us? That doesn't happen in MEF land, right? Dale, do you want to respond to Frank's comments?
It's not really a response, just to add to what was said, back to the service provider and MEF, actually to reconnect the pieces. I think service providers have not been very vocal yet about the need for standardization definitions. The work that MEF is doing, I see very few RFPs coming to us. We're mandating that those services be defined that way, and we collaborate. Because if you don't, I mean, there are multiple areas here. It's connected. It's not just one piece that needs to happen, not the other. Like, we need to be aware much more of what the body of work that has been done. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, if the route to market is going to be primarily managed service based, service provider based, then they are the ones to mandate to say, you know what, you better actually, if you don't respond to this RFP based on those elements or criteria or standard definitions, you're not going to be part of it. And that's at the end of the day, that's the motivation. Otherwise, we will continue to do what we think is the right thing to do. We will reinvent a lot of stuff, and we'll differentiate not just in terms of how we do things, but also, what we want to offer, how we define even some specific concepts, and that people can't even compare to one another, create confusion, slow down market. Goes back to actually how do we accelerate? Well, if it's normalized, then people can actually better compare and better make decisions about whether or not you differentiate from the next.
All right. Pascal, we're running out of time rapidly. Can I ask you to just speak to that last column, if you would, just for a minute or so?
Well, I think exactly what we've been trying to do is trying to enable a market that is very confused. Like Carrier Ethernet was in the early days. And if you look at Carrier Ethernet, when MEF did it, grew to $80 billion market. If there was no standardization, would it be $80 billion market? Right? That's the question. We won't know. We'd have to go in a parallel universe to figure that one out. But look, the bottom line is we intentionally went after areas that no one was standardizing. SD-WAN, SASE, Zero Trust, even edge compute is in a state of flux because there's no standardization on what is a large compute, small compute, containers. It's all over the place. So in my opinion, as long as there's confusion, markets never reach their potential because when someone's confused, they won't buy.
Right.
And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And why we created the tab was we never really had the technology providers who was doing the innovation to get involved and say, with our strategy, what's wrong with our positioning and thinking? Thanks, to our tab and JL and Craig and others in the tab who said, hey, get your providers put RFPs in, is what JL just said. Craig says, standardization is important. Let's agree on some basic things that we all do. They all do. And that's going to help, And so I think, in MEF, our job is not just automation, which is critical, but it's also going up the stack. So.
That's right. Gentlemen, terrific panel. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.